now that I've made that previous episode, which I'll call the globalisation of Italy, I feel I can make a shorter version. But I couldn't have made this shorter version had I not done the longer version. But my feelings on, as I reflected upon I look dead with my eyes in shadow there. Don't worry, I will be soon anyway. The unification of Italy in the 1800s, to me, as I reflected upon it, feels like the local globalisation of Italy, where a whole lot of kingdoms all become just one nation. So, you know, if for a moment you imagined that Italy was the whole world, for you, you know, back in the 1800s, then when all the kingdoms of Italy unified into one nation, that was globalisation in action. Now, was it the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do? It was a dead set tragedy, no doubt, for anyone who valued the previous system, you know, anyone who loved being, you know, one of the two Sicilies or whatever, you know, that sort of thing, and didn't want, you know, anyone who didn't want to be Italian. They just wanted to be, you know, whatever they were, Calabrian or something, or Roman or whatever, you know. It was a tragedy, the globalisation of Italy, the unification of Italy, I'm sure. And a lot of people died as a result of it, but it was inevitable, given the technological and advances and all, of the time and all that sort of stuff, the Industrial Revolution and all that sort of thing. It was inevitable, and to a certain extent, if you were back in those times and you were resisting the globalisation of Italy, the unification of Italy, you know, I imagine you were on the wrong side of history, and it might have been a better idea and, you know, prevented a lot of bloodshed if you just got on board and argued instead about what sort of globalised Italy you thought was the right one, you know, rather than people being, you know, in those situations, I think, rather than being pro-unification or anti-unification, it almost sort of feels like it's the case that, you know, it's a losing battle, you know. The real fight should be, perhaps, you know, if you were able to read the wind, you know, that with the rise of technology at the time and all that sort of stuff, the Industrial Revolution and all those sorts of things, the Enlightenment and all those sorts of things, unification or, you know, globalization, local globalizations were inevitable all over the place, in Europe at least, you know, and in America, and, you know, and even here in Australia, and, you know, and states or, you know, kingdoms all coalesce to become nations. So nations is like a step one towards globalization, because it's local globalization. You know? And I mentioned we have the same sort of situation going on in Ethiopia at the moment, and there are people, I know one of them, who resist the idea of a single Ethiopia, you know, which is a combination of all the tribes in Ethiopia. You know, the idea of one Ethiopia, you know, all speaking the one language and all that sort of stuff, you know, because that happened in Italy too. They were all speaking different languages, different types of Italian, as we might call it, and they were all standardized under one Italian, one form of Italian. And everyone sort of, you know, there's one Italian dictionary now instead of hundreds. So, you know, you can imagine in Ethiopia, everyone's speaking Amharic at some stage, you know, and you've got two choices, sort of thing. You either resist it altogether and say, no, we want all sorts of, you know, we want, you know, 48 different nations in Ethiopia instead of one Ethiopia, you know, and everyone keeping their own cultures and all that sort of stuff. But, you know, or alternatively, some sort of, well, they had what they called an ethnic federalism, you know, where it's all, it's trying to have your cake and eat it too, you know, kind of being a nation, but not, you know. But either way, resisting local globalization because afoot at present is a local globalisation of Ethiopia, courtesy of the current Prime Minister, Dr. Abiy. Now, he might be on the right side of history, and he might be doing the inevitable thing, even if it's not the good thing for you or the right thing. It's kind of the right thing in a way because it's the inevitable thing, and sometimes if something's inevitable, you might as well get on deck with it and then argue what sort of globalisation you want. You're going to have a globalisation of one sort or another because it's non-optimal in a world where technology is on the rise to actually fragment. So you have to go in the opposite direction usually, and that was the experience of Europe in the 1800s. Hundreds of small city-states and kingdoms and everything all became just a few countries. All the little kingdoms of Germany became Germany, and all the kingdoms of Italy became Italy, and so on and so forth. And right now, in the 21st century, all the little sort of tribes of Ethiopia, under a so-called ethnic federalism, are becoming a single Ethiopia, but a single civic Ethiopia, and you could resist it, but that'd be like being, in one of the city-states of Italy, back in Italy, in the 1800s, and resisting that, and a lot of blood gets shed and all that. So you might as well get on board. Say, listen, there is going to be a one Italy. I can see the writing on the wall. So, the real fight is what sort of one Italy shall we have? And to that extent, I start to think that with an even bigger rise in technology now, the information revolution, that's inevitable for the whole world. And especially as an Australian, why would I want to blend, with the rest of the world when Australia really is the best place to live on the whole planet? I should be anti-globalist. But if technology keeps going the way it is, globalisation of the whole planet is inevitable, I think. And it's a bit, and you're fighting a rearguard losing battle to try and hold on to nations, maybe. And the question becomes, what sort of globalisation do you want? Because we're all going to be one world anyway, whether we like it or not. Now, obviously you can resist that, but then a lot of blood is shed, and people will resist it, and I probably will too, to a certain extent, because I like Australia. I'm a bit nationalistic about Australia. All right, but for all the hairs there are on globalisation as a concept, shocking hairs. A disaster of an idea, just like Italy was probably a disaster of an idea to a lot of people back in the 1800s. I'm sure there were people thinking, if we turn into one Italy, we're going to have another Augustus Caesar come along and just dominate us all and turn us into a dictatorial state. Italy didn't quite turn out that way. It just turned into an ongoing basket case. But politically, it really did. They've had more prime ministers than I've had hot dinners since in my lifetime. But the globalisation of the entire world seems inevitable to me. Because it's going to be prompted. Modern technology is going to force it. Modern communications are going to force it. And to a certain extent, I think, well, I might as well get my head in that sort of space. I hate that term. And think, well, there is going to, the world is becoming globalised, so maybe I should just, not be one of those people saying, we must stick to existing constitutions that were all worded in an age that came before the information age, so they're all out of date. we need to hold on to the Constitution of Australia and all that sort of stuff. I could argue all of that, and I'm attracted to that idea because I like my nation state of Australia. But on another level, I could start to think, oh, look, we're going global. Globalisation is coming. So maybe I should just get ahead of the game and start already thinking of, all right, what are the bad things that could come from globalisation? What can we do to see those off? For example, someone like Napoleon rising up and becoming king of the world, because there's only one world. The only thing that stopped people like Alexander or Napoleon or Julius Caesar and all those sorts of people from becoming immediate kings of the world overnight was because the world wasn't one country back then, and there were natural barriers and all that sort of stuff, and between different areas of the world. But if we were one world, you can imagine a Napoleon coming along and just announcing himself a king of the world, sweeping to power, perhaps via democracy, Trump style, that sort of thing. So they'd be the bad things, but there's some good things that could be got from globalisation, because right now, for example, mentioning Ethiopia before, a child born in Ethiopia right now, in the same world as my children being born in that same world, except in Australia, my kids have got massively better educational options. They're going to get, they've got so many better chances. And that's not fair. So globalisation could fix that sort of thing. Like health-wise, just being born in Australia, a kid here, it's the old story. That's not fair. A kid being born in Ethiopia right now has much less chance of good medical assistance throughout his or her life than an Australian kid, and that's wrong. So globalisation, we might as well start thinking about, look, we could resist globalisation, but we could, I'm of the mind that we've got, it's a bit silly to say I'm anti-globalisation. Well, globalisation's coming is what I'm thinking at the moment. Globalisation is coming, whether you like it or not. So, stop wasting my time talking about, I'm anti-globalisation. You're going to try and slow it up, are you? But it's coming anyway. All right, so globalisation is coming. What sort of globalisation, do you want? That's what I'd say if I was out for a coffee with someone. What sort of globalisation are you after? And they'd say, I don't want any globalisation at all. I say, yeah, all right, but it's coming. So what sort of globalisation do you want? I'm against it. Yeah, all right. But it's coming. What sort of globalisation do you want? And then you can start saying, I'm scared, of I'm scared of some of the things that happened in ancient Rome, where just a few families ran the whole world, owned the whole world, all the wealth was concentrated in the hands of just a couple of people, a couple of families, about 5 families or something. I'm scared of that, so that's a real risk. And they say, that's why I don't want globalisation, they say. I say, I know, but it's coming anyway. So what do we do to reduce the risk of that and all the other bad things that are likely to happen with globalisation? What do we do? And then the conversation would change slightly, because globalisation has become inevitable in that coffee shop conversation. And then I'd say, but look at the good, and we have to we have to try and reduce the risk of the bad things, and get this thing we've got going in Australia, get that going right around the world, where everyone's got pretty much a guarantee of a decent education here in Australia. Just about everybody. There's certain people that haven't, and notably some Indigenous people. It's just we're not doing, we're not succeeding there. But all right. So equality of educational opportunities worldwide. It sounds really socialist, but it's actually a really good thing. Conceptually, and equality of health outcomes for all children born worldwide. They've all got a reasonable chance at good health services, and all that sort of stuff. That's what's good about globalisation. So, the conversation would shift. Just like the conversation might have shifted back in Italy. At some stage when Italian unification started to become inevitable in people's minds, they would have said, all right, we're going to have one flag. What's the best Italy we can make, all right, we give up, we stop fighting against Italian unification, Italian local globalisation. All right, we'll stop killing each other over that. What sort of Italy do we want? And I reckon that's the way the world's going to go. All right, eventually we're going to we're going to give up fighting for, sovereignty of various nations and all that sort of stuff. A sovereign Australia, a sovereign, New Zealand, a sovereign this, a sovereign that. And we're going to say, oh, look, nations are a thing of the past. Globalisation is an inevitable. What sort of one world do we want? And, obviously we probably start with health and education first, But then, there'll be Napoleon types out there who'll be thinking, this is my chance for global domination. I'm going to be the king of the world, But the trouble is, I think the world, I think globalisation is inevitable, and we're going to have to sort of, you can't stop it just because those bad things are likely to crop up. The risk of a world dictator and all that sort of stuff. You can't stop globalisation, so might as well, let's tackle it already. And while we're at it, think about that health and education stuff at the same time. That's my thoughts at the moment. To a certain extent, it makes me a little bit pro-globalisation at the moment, but not really. I'm just being a realist and recognising that globalisation is an inevitability. So I'm arguing for the best possible globalisation there is, which doesn't quite make me a globalist. It just means I'm sort of starting to think, globalisation is coming anyway. So I'm not arguing for globalisation, I'm just admitting it's coming and thinking, and then starting to, in my head, design what form of globalisation I like. But anti-globalists might misinterpret that as me saying I'm pro-globalisation when I'm not in some ways, but I am in other ways. Health and education. I'm a globalist and a socialist when it comes to health and education. I really am. Because I'm an Australian, and most Australians are socialists when it comes to health and education. Just about all of us, actually. I know our major parties are both Liberal and Labor. Anyway, that's my thoughts for now.